And let's welcome John McClain.
Can you hear me? Is that working? Thank you, Michelle. I'm very glad to be here. I'm glad to have a chance to represent George Mason University, which is a part of the Prince William community. We're very proud of our campus and activities that we have here. When Michelle called and invited me to be here, we do a lot of research on the Washington area, and I think the first question that came to my mind is, why are we having a stimulus package? And I think it may be obvious, but just a couple of numbers. We entered a recession in late 2007, December 2007, even though we had a small stimulus package in the spring of 08, which was a consumer spending stimulus package, which helped us actually turn positive a little bit in terms of GDP nationally. But then that went away. We spent our money, we spent our checks that we got, and there were some underlying fundamental things that were at work in our economy that kept us going down, and we have been going down pretty significantly. Yesterday, the data was released that our GDP in the fourth quarter of 08 was minus 6.3%, higher than earlier estimates. We buy forecasts from Global Insight. Their forecast for the quarter we're currently in, which ends next Wednesday or next Tuesday, is minus 6.8% for the first quarter of 09. Forecast for the second quarter is minus 4%. It's minus 2% for the third quarter, and it might reach flat at the end of 09. And so if these numbers hold true, we're going to be looking at a recession that will have lasted for 24 months. The annual drop in GDP will be approximately, will approach 4% for 2009. The last recession that we had that came close to this was 1982, which lasted for 16 months, and in which GDP dropped not quite 2%. So we're looking at a recession. This recession that we are in is going to be 50% longer and twice as deep as the 1982 recession, which is the last one that many of us in this room can remember. So that this will be the worst recession since 1945, 6, and 7, which most of us in this room can't remember. But it is a bad time, and so that's why the Bush administration last year and looked at all the problems with our financial system, and we're trying to do some things, and why the Obama administration, as it has taken office, has put a lot of emphasis on trying to turn the economy around. There's some basic things that are down. And just as a local note, the national economy is a whole lot worse than we are here. We got numbers this morning from BLS on metropolitan area job numbers. The Washington metro area has lost 3,300 jobs in the last 12 months. We turned negative in December for the first time since 2 months after 9/11. Every other major metropolitan area in the country is a whole lot worse off. We're down 3,300. Los Angeles is down 203,000. New York is down 193,000. Chicago is down 150,000. Phoenix is down 150,000. We're down 3,300. We're being affected, and we're going to be affected during 09, but we're not going to be nearly as bad off as others. Nationally, the U.S. economy has 4.5 million jobs fewer now than it had 12 months ago. So there's obviously some priority and some stimulus for our government to do some things, to try to make something happen, to try to turn this economy around. So I think it's a very important topic. Will it work? Are the right things being done? When will it start to work? What is shovel ready, and are we shovel ready? So that's what we're going to talk about. Our format's going to be slightly different. Congressman Connolly is going to be appearing on Fox News in the morning, very early in the morning, and we're going to have him do his 15 minutes, and then we'll do some Q&A with him before he leaves, and then we'll have Chairman Stewart and Secretary Homer after that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gerry. I'm not going to read long introductions, just a couple of things. Gerry was elected president of the freshman class. He's a brand new congressman from the 11th District. 14 years on the Fairfax board, the last, how many, 7 as chair, 8 as chair. So welcome, Gerry, and we look forward to what you have to say.
One of the first things that happens to you when you become a congressman is you got to learn how to use a BlackBerry. It goes everywhere with you. You know, I can't resist. We're just a few short days following the holiest day of the year, St. Patrick's Day. And I was thinking about the wonderful Irish lady who was driving around, but she was driving too fast in a neighborhood not far from here in Prince William County, and she, Mrs. Murphy, and she was driving about 45 miles an hour in a 25 mile per hour zone in a residential community. So a young cop, just a few weeks out of the academy, stops her, and he says, "Ma'am, I need to see your license." And in that sweet Irish lilt, she says, "Well, I don't have one." He said, "Well, I'll have to see the car registration." She says, "It's a stolen vehicle." He said, "Ma'am, I'd like you to open the trunk." She said, "You don't want to do that. There's a dead body in there." He's flustered, being only 2 weeks out of the academy, and he calls for backup, and a sergeant comes over, pretty lickety spit, and sergeant is very officious and businesslike, knocks on the window, she rolls it down, and he says, "Ma'am, I need to see your license." And she goes, "No problem." And she pulls it right out of her pocketbook. He says, "I need to see the vehicle registration." She says, "No problem, it's right here in the glove compartment." She opens it up. He said, "I'd like you to open the trunk." So she opens the trunk, clean as a whistle. He comes back and he says, "Ma'am, I don't understand. You told my young officer you were driving without a license. It was a stolen vehicle and it was a dead body in the back of the trunk." And she looked at him with that sweet Irish face and said, "I bet he said I was speeding too, didn't he?" John talked a little bit about, I think we have to sort of set the stage. We're really in uncharted territory for most of us today in terms of the U.S. economy and indeed the world economy. I mean, we could go even beyond what's happening here in the United States. John talked about the fact that they just revised the contraction of the United States economy, and instead of it being negative 6.2, it was a negative 6.3% in the last quarter, the fourth quarter of last year. In Japan, that number was over 12.1%. So we think we've got it bad. They got it even worse in terms of the contraction that's occurring in the second largest industrial economy in the world. You may have read that Iceland, as an entire country, went bankrupt. They're actually bankrupt, which is a little disconcerting because they get caught up in the financial problems plaguing the financial industry. In Virginia, our unemployment rate in this time period has gone from 3.4% to over 6%. And as John indicated, frankly, the job loss in Northern Virginia has been relatively mild by comparison with other parts of the country. And it's something that's systemic. It isn't just that these are bad times. We're looking at unprecedented numbers in terms of business failures, bank failures, foreclosures. Certainly here in Prince William County, we've experienced foreclosures, as has Fairfax County. But if you go to Cleveland, there are whole neighborhoods that are depopulated and shuttered up. The fastest growing expense of the Cleveland city budget is demolition, because the houses have been stripped bare so badly that they can't be rehabbed. They have to be, as a safety factor, demolished. And so whole streets of whole neighborhoods are being bulldozed in one of the most important urban areas in the United States. So we're looking at, and in many urban areas and in many parts of the Rust Belt especially, we're looking at double-digit unemployment. In fact, it's been estimated that, frankly, without the stimulus we're talking about tonight, unemployment would rise to at least 12% in the United States. It is hoped we'll stem that tide at 9 or 10% by the end of this year. We'll see. Every time we get new statistics, they get worse. We lost 4.4 million jobs last year. As you know, last month, the unemployment rate was 651,000. That, multiply that times 12, and that's the annual rate of unemployment. That would mean we'd be shedding over 7 million jobs, not 4 million jobs. That's pretty bad. And you're seeing these statistics go in lots of different ways. We have had a collapsing housing market in which housing values have declined for 24 consecutive months. At the height of the robust economy, which is now a distant memory, for example, car sales, were approaching, I want to say, John, 17 million, something like that. Sound right? They now think car sales in the United States this year could be 9 million. The auto industry can't survive at 9 million, not the big three. Just can't be done, no matter how many bailouts we talk about. Consumer confidence plummeted to the lowest level recorded in terms of a single drop since we started measuring consumer confidence. You could go on and on with the bad news in this economy. The total contraction estimated is somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 trillion, which certainly we did not experience in 1982. This is the largest single contraction of the United States economy since the 1930s. And so this is serious. And the old political divisions and the old rhetoric won't do. We have to save the United States economy. I met with 15 economists on the right and on the left between my election and my swearing in. 15. And they included Mark Zandi, who had been the economic advisor to John McCain in the recent election and had been an economic official in the Reagan administration. Larry Lindsay, who's a constituent of mine, and had served on the Federal Reserve Board under President Bush I and was an economic advisor under President Bush II, as well as Democratic leaning economists such as Barry Bosworth of the Brookings Institution. To a person, every one of those economists said to the freshman class, Democrats and Republicans, do not focus on the deficit right now. Focus on stimulating this economy or it's going to go off a cliff. You think this is bad now, you let it go. If you don't do something to intervene and try to stem the hemorrhaging, I'm mixing my metaphors, I'm sorry, Susan, but you are going to look at a depression, and it will be long-lasting if you don't do something now to try to reinstill consumer confidence, return to consumer spending patterns, get people back to work. The government is the last resort. Nobody else can do it. All of the big institutions we might normally count on in the private sector are themselves the problem. In the housing sector, the automotive sector, the financial services sector. Who's going to do it? So, thus, the stimulus. The stimulus bill was, as I said, a bipartisan advocated instrument of federal policy to try to turn this economy around. At the end of the day, after lots of machinations, it was a $797 billion bill. It does sort of two sets of things from my point of view. One is it immediately tries to jumpstart the economy by pumping money into shovel-ready projects and other things like schools. And I can give you the list of Prince William County projects, but there's lots of stuff here in Prince William County. There's probably approaching over about $30 million over the 2 years for our school system here in Prince William County. There's community development block grants of about $500,000. There's money for our public safety in Prince William County of about $528,000. Let me see. There's $3.2 million for energy and conservation block grants for Prince William County. And none of this, and then there are 9 new locomotives for VRE from which we will, of course, benefit. And then there's about $800 million for the state of Virginia going to transportation infrastructure, from which Prince William County obviously will benefit, and I know Secretary Homer will maybe outline some of those projects. I was very pleased that when the president decided to highlight shovel-ready projects The one project in the whole country he decided to highlight was in Northern Virginia. It was at the Engineering Proving Grounds on the County Parkway, which is a critical piece that's missing, about 3.5 miles, I think. About that, Pierce? Okay, maybe 2. It just feels like 3.5 miles. That's the project he physically went to and said, this is what's going to be completed. This is the kind of project I'm talking about. And he's right. Pierce and I have been working on that project for a long time. We're ready to go. It had at one point been fully funded. We need a little bit of federal assistance here, and we can get that project done, and we can get it done, I think, in the next 18-month period. So the stimulus is going to, help schools, plug budgets, aid states with Medicaid funding so that they don't go under. In fact, Virginia is the first state in the country, on a bipartisan basis, I might add, in Richmond, to actually balance its budget this year with using stimulus funding. First of the 50 to do so. And in my view, that's not a bad thing. Because if you hadn't done that, you're laying off more state troopers, more police, more teachers, more firefighters, lots of human services that aren't provided, that are needed now more than ever before in the desperation, economic desperation so many of our fellow citizens are facing. The other thing, however, the stimulus bill does, and other bills are going to build on this, is also invest in the innovative economy of the future. So while we're creating jobs and spending money, we're also innovating and attracting other investment. We put $8 billion into new transit systems and existing transit systems. You announce you're building a transit system in an urban area, and it becomes a magnet for lots of other investments. Look at our own experience in metropolitan Washington. Nobody lost a dime betting on the metro system in metropolitan Washington. In fact, property values went up many, many folds, and it attracted lots of other mixed-use development and investment, a good thing for our local economy. Green technology in terms of advanced battery research, for example, for the next generation of hybrid vehicles. Advanced battery research to promote solar. One of the limitations of solar technology is we don't really have a good battery storage capacity. That's not something that we were generations away from. So with a little bit of R&D, research and development money, we can probably have a breakthrough there, making solar more affordable and much more universally used in the United States. And I mentioned these along with many other technological advances. And one other thing in the healthcare field, we've been talking for years about moving to electronic record keeping to save money and to make it more efficient and, frankly, save lives. The paper system, frankly, has a lot of problems associated with it. In the stimulus bill is $19 billion to make that happen nationwide. And it's going to put people to work. It's also going to help make our healthcare system a lot more efficient and safer. Much of that technology work in the green economy, in healthcare, in the smart grid that's also funded in the stimulus bill will be done here in Northern Virginia because we are the second hub in the country in terms of technology companies. A lot of that know-how, a lot of that research, a lot of that work will be done here. So our firms will benefit. In fact, just the job creation alone in my district, in the 11th Congressional District, all of which is in Northern Virginia and Prince William County and Fairfax, we're going to create, it's estimated, 9,300 jobs from the stimulus. And that's one congressional district. So here in Northern Virginia, we're going to, in some ways, disproportionately benefit from the stimulus funding, both in terms of shovel-ready projects, if you can call it that, but also in the investments in the innovative economy that I think are so important because those are the gifts that keep on giving. That's not just a one-time thing. I can't read very well. That says 10 minutes left. No, 2 minutes, 2 minutes left. So, as I said, I'll continue to give reports. Prince William County is going to benefit a lot from the stimulus. Our school system has benefited a lot because, frankly, those dollars mean the local tax dollars don't have to substitute for them, or worse, we have to make significant cutbacks in a school system that's a high-performing school system, and we want it to stay that way. Keeping kids in classrooms, making sure good teachers and custodians and janitors and bus drivers are still working is a good thing. And laying them off is not such a good thing. And by the way, it can take a long time to recover from. When you start to disinvest, especially in education, that's not something you can easily repair a year or two later because damage gets done. So schools need to be our #1 priority. I was happy to vote for the stimulus package. If I could have come up with a stimulus package all by myself and had to consult with nobody else, it might have looked different. But But the choice wasn't that. The choice was do something or do nothing. And I worked hard as a freshman to try to perfect it. We had some successes in, for example, weatherization. I had a provision that got adopted in the final stimulus that got us from the zeroing out of the weatherization program to back up to 2 million households eligible for weatherization, the single most energy efficiency thing we can do to save on imported oil and gas and to make our homes more efficient and to help the environment. So there's a lot of stuff in there that has other benefits as well. But right now, given the seriousness of this economy, I've frankly felt it would have been criminal on my part as a member of Congress to do nothing. And I would not do that. I didn't get elected to do that. I didn't run on that. I promised I would address the economy, and I feel I've redeemed that pledge in voting for the stimulus that I think will be very good for our community in Northern Virginia, especially here in Prince William County. And my time is up. Thank you very much for having me here today.
We'll take a few questions with Gerry. Let me, as a moderator, take privilege and ask one that I have. You mentioned the 9,300 job impact and a lot of dollars and so forth. One of the as we look at what the impact is going to be of the stimulus package, how much net new are we talking about over what we would have been spending if we were in a normal time? In other words, are these replacement dollars for things that we didn't have? Or is this all net new? Is it $787 billion net new?
Yeah, good question. Well, so most of it is probably net new, but remember that the politics of the stimulus bill were that no Republicans in the House were going to vote for it as a matter of party discipline. And in the Senate, 3 Republicans said they would vote for it, but under certain conditions. And there were many conditions, one of which helps our district, but it doesn't help everybody in the country, and that was to essentially address the alternative minimum tax, the AMT. And they put that in the stimulus bill. Now, frankly, there's nothing stimulative about that, but that was a Republican amendment that they insisted on as the price of their support for the overall bill. So there's about $40 billion in there for AMT. And I don't know whether that's a substitute dollar or a net new dollar. It addresses a tax problem that particularly affects a district like ours, but it doesn't particularly have any stimulative effect. So that one I'd put in a different category. In some cases, I think Medicaid funding to states, you're looking at substitute dollars for budgets that had holes in them. Maybe some of the education funding as well. But I think, frankly, in a lot of the transportation infrastructure projects, what we're looking at is we either don't do it and defund it, or we do it. And in some cases, and Pierce will talk more about this as the Secretary of Transportation, it also allows us to attend some projects that otherwise we would not have done. Ready to go, but there was no source of funding. Pierce has 2 problems he'll talk about. One is he had to defund projects that were ready to go. The other is he had some ready to go on the shelf, but no funding identified at all. So the stimulus will help him in both of those categories.
Yes, right here.
Hey, Bob.
I know your economist said don't worry about the deficit, but one...
At this time.
Oh. Did you read the entire bill, and when do we start worrying about the deficit? Because I read an economist from Stanford said that the amount of debt that President Obama is piling up with this stimulus and the projected budgets under him will exceed all the deficits from George Washington to the past George Bush. So when do we start worrying about that? And again, did you read the whole bill?
Thank you, Bob. You can sit down. I always find it interesting to get a question of whether I read the whole bill from somebody who works in the General Assembly that meets 45 days or 60 days of the year and looks at 4,000 pieces of legislation. I'd like to ask that question to them. Do they read every one of those bills? But then again, he's asked a question. You know, this was a canard that was used that I found amusing. There is no bill, probably, as long as I'm going to be in the Congress, that received more attention, more briefings, more readings, more skull sessions than the stimulus. I spent most of my first 5 or 6 weeks in the Congress, frankly, focused on the stimulus bill, going to endless meetings, one-on-one meetings with chairmen of relevant committees going over parts of the bill, Ways and Means, Transportation and Infrastructure, financial services, meeting with Barney Frank, the chairman of that latter one, Charlie Rangel, the chairman of Ways and Means, Jim Obastar, the chairman of TNI, and lots of other people. The Speaker of the House, I met with the President, I met with the head of OMB. I read pages and pages and pages of material, so that by the time we voted on it in the House, we were quite familiar with the piece of legislation, probably more familiar than most pieces of legislation. The bill that Delegate Marshall is referring to, I guess, that made good photograph was not the bill we voted on in the House originally, but was the bill that came back to us from the Senate that had these amendments I was talking about. And that's the one they piled on the desk saying, no one has seen these 1,100 pages. And that's just flat out untrue. Most of the bill we voted on, in fact, was the original House bill with, however, Senate amendments. Well, I can tell you, on the House side, we were very focused on the difference in that pile because some things we cared about got taken out. I just mentioned the AMT. A good thing to do from our point of view in the 11th Congressional District, not such a good thing to do if you're worried about hollowing out housing in Cleveland. Really didn't belong in the stimulus bill, but was the price of admission to get 3 Republican votes in the Senate so that we could get past 60. So that was a Republican amendment put in that bill. We were very aware of it. I read every word of it. Another thing the Republicans took out in the Senate was school construction money. There were a few $1 million that would have come to Prince William County directly for school construction. And some people, not very well informed in the Senate, said it's unprecedented to have the federal government play a role in school construction. Has never happened before. And it's outrageous that the House would put that in the bill and break this precedent and for the first time get the federal government actually involved in school construction and renovation. And I was at a Democratic caucus meeting talking about these differences and looking at the differences, looking at them. And I looked at the stripping out of the school construction, and I, for the first time, spoke in a Democratic caucus meeting. And because one of my colleagues from California was defending the stripping out of the school, because this was unprecedented. And I got up and I said, well, that would come as news to my constituents in Mount Vernon, where Mount Vernon High School was built with federal money. By the way, I double-checked just to make sure. There are 1,453 schools all across the United States built with federal money. Other than that, you're right, it's unprecedented. So the notion that we didn't read the bill and we were all just voting on something that who knows what was in it, it's just false. It got incredible attention. I don't know that any member of any legislature with big complex bills sits down the night before and reads every page, but good luck to them if they do. But it is vital that you know basically what's in there and what isn't. And we had a process to do just that. And, you know, there may be some things some people don't like. There were some things that were highlighted that I frankly think got a bad rap. I would have supported, for example, continuing the investment to try to rehab the mall down in Washington. There's a lot of work besides just putting sod that has to be done down there, one of which, by the way, is to shore up the Jefferson Memorial, which is sinking. But in the sound bites about it, you know, the other side decided to just make fun of it as if it was all about putting new grass on the mall. Well, actually, it was a lot more complicated than that. And by the way, the Jefferson Memorial continues to sink, except now we have no funding to address it.
Excuse me, I think the other part of this question was, when do we start worrying about the deficit?
Oh, the deficit. Well, first of all, let me correct what I said. I hope I said, that what they said was, don't worry about the deficit now, focus on stimulus. You know, don't be distracted about the deficit because that's, right now, we got a crisis. The budget we marked up, and I'm on the budget committee Wednesday night, if adopted, will take the deficit from 1.5 trillion to $0.5 trillion in 4 years. So we'll knock down 2/3 of the deficit and put us on a glide path toward further reductions in that deficit. I will, however, say and remind you, and again, I find it, I appreciate the fact that it's Delegate Marshall, who's on the other side of the aisle, now so concerned about deficits. Because for 8 long years, there was no concern about deficits. Let me remind you that in 2001, when President Bush was sworn into office, we had had 2 consecutive budget surpluses. For the first time since the Civil War, we'd had 2 consecutive budget surpluses, and not only did we have a surplus in the budget, we were paying down the debt. There were stories, John, you will remember this. There were stories about, oh my God, what will this do to the bond market? If they pay off the whole debt, the bond market will collapse. You know, they won't sell treasuries anymore. What will this do to interest rates? It was a bad problem to have a surplus and pay down the debt, but we were doing it. And the projection was those surpluses would continue as far as the eye could see. A different president came into office and decided to use those surpluses not to pay down debt, which is a newfound concern, but in fact to provide, you know, very substantial tax reductions, which they knew at the time would turn surpluses into significant debts. Even before this budget, the deficit we inherited from the previous administration was estimated to be $1.1 trillion. What the Obama budget does to stimulate the economy is add $500 billion to that, and then provides a plan for trying to get us back down to where we need to be over time. But it will take time. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for coming, Congressman.
My pleasure.
I live in the Gainesville district. My name is Donna Wadowski, and it's a pleasure to be here and have you speaking.
Good to see you, Donna.
I have a question. What did you do to increase capital transportation spending or increase flexibility for states to spend the stimulus money in the areas of the most transportation needs, such as congestion, traffic, etc.?
Two good questions. Let me take the first one first. I mean, the second one first, if I may. There was actually language added by members of Congress from other parts of the country that said in prioritizing transportation infrastructure spending, what needs to be taken into account is areas, hard-hit areas economically, distressed areas of the economy. Now, here in Virginia, the problem with that language is that would direct, if left alone, that directs Pierce to spend money in Southwest Virginia, where you can spend all the money you want in transportation, but given the economy, not many people are going to use those transportation systems. Nor will it have much promise to attract a lot of additional investment anytime soon. You put $1 into transportation here in Prince William County or Fairfax, guaranteed return on that investment, guaranteed. It will create jobs. It will be a magnet for other jobs and other economic activity. The ROI is very high. It makes more sense under a stimulus plan to invest in places like this than some other places in the short run anyhow. I don't mean to deny other parts of the state their needs, but we know that here it would pay off. Everything we want to do under the stimulus happens if we do that. So one of the things I tried to do was fight that language, and we did get it diluted. We weren't able to get it eliminated because I represent this kind of district, but there are lots of other members of Congress who, you know, come from rural areas and some very poor inner city areas who obviously have a different perspective about where money ought to be spent and how. The second question, what did I do about capital? When I got sworn in, I'm one of the original founders of a new caucus called the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Caucus, which is a mouthful. So we call ourselves the Green Dogs. And it's the environmental caucus in the Congress to try to advocate for a strong environmental push whenever we do anything. And we had some real victories in the stimulus legislation, one of which was the question you asked. Originally, there was only going to be $8 billion for for transit projects, and we got a floor amendment to get it back up to 12. The Senate, those people, you know, I have to digress here, but Sam Rayburn once said in the House of Representatives, and he was a yellow dog Democrat, so he said the Republicans are the opposition, but the Senate is the enemy. And there's a little bit of that in the House. So those senators, once again, they took out the extra money we put in for transit. And but what we were able to get was $8 billion for high-speed rail. So there's $8 billion for transit and $8 billion for high-speed rail. Now, that's in the stimulus bill. There's also money, and again, Homer may want to address that, in the omnibus, the funding bill for the rest of the year for the federal government. There is more money for transit and transportation in that bill. That was $410 billion to finish the work not finished last year. In addition, we are now in the process of getting ready to reauthorize the big transportation bill of the federal government. Is it 5 or 6 years? Is it 6? It's 5. It's a 5-year. It may end up being 6 because we may not get. But at any rate, that's hundreds of billions of dollars for new transportation funding, including transit. So there'll be lots of new or additional transit money this year, probably more than ever before. Actually, if you look at it through the three different spigots. The big problem with transit, though, isn't just how much. It's how it works. And if I could just take 1 minute, and if you look at how the federal government handles highways and bridges versus transit, the highway and bridges thing is very easy. We decide on the size of the funding pie, and then we say, okay, Sal, you're from Virginia. Your slice is this much. Go with God. Here it is. Sal goes back to Richmond, and jurisdictions and the state work out, well, what projects will we fund from Sal's slice? That's not how it works with transit. In transit, before I even go to Richmond, I got to go to the federal government, and I got to persuade them of my design, of my engineering, of my finance plan. I have to go through a whole bunch of environmental hoops and loops. I've got to prove I've got the ridership that they decide is adequate or not. Then they added something called the cost effectiveness cap. So they have this formula, which is impossible to describe to you, because they can't describe it. Nonetheless, it exists. And periodically they change it arbitrarily, I might add, called the cost effectiveness cap. So there's this magic number beyond which you dare not go or you're automatically disqualified. In the middle of Rail to Dulles, they changed that formula on us, which had we not gone to Congress and gotten exemptions, it would have stopped every new start in transit in the country, not just us, which it seemed designed to do, by the way. If you're worried about the environment, if you're worried about energy, oil dependence on foreign suppliers, transit is a critical investment for the future in urban congested areas. We want more of it, not less of it. But it's not just how much we give transit. We got to change the federal approval process to make it easier for jurisdictions and people like Pierce Homer to access those monies and want to build more transit systems. Last one, Bruce.
In fact, they said they're not going to take some of the stimulus money. Is there anything in the bill that will give the rest of it to us?
In case you couldn't hear the first part of what Bruce said, Bruce pointed out that there were 4, I think, Republican governors, including the recent vice presidential nominee from Alaska, Sarah Palin, who have said they don't like the stimulus bill and they would prefer not to actually take any money, I guess, from it. And of course, my view about that as a Virginian is I'm happy to reallocate those resources if I could. However, it's the people of those states who suffer if that happens. I will point out, however, there are lots of Republican governors who disagree with that. Arnold Schwarzenegger has praised the stimulus bill. Governor Charlie Crist of Florida has praised the bill. John Huntsman of Utah, hardly a liberal, has praised the stimulus bill, and all of them saying we are going to avail ourselves of it. We're glad Congress passed it. We need these funds, and they represent critical investments in moving forward. So they're a minority even in their own party, and I'm happy to work with anyone on a bipartisan basis. But I think we have to keep in mind that even if somebody decides to ideologically to make an issue out of that, you got to worry about the people who live in those states. They're Americans too. Thank you all so much for having me tonight. I'm sorry I got to run. John, thank you. God bless. Can I just want an introduction? I want to introduce Colin Davenport from my office. Colin, raise your hand. And James Walkinshaw. James, come back in here. He's a Prince William County boy. He's my chief of staff. I am pleased to tell you that the Congress is about to approve my lease on the Prince William County office. We will be opening the Prince William County office in a matter of a few weeks. We will have an open house and let you know, but we're back in Prince William County. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Gerry. I'd now like to ask Chairman Corey Stewart to come up. As you know, Mr. Stewart has been your chairman on Augusta now for 6 years. A lawyer with Foley and Lardner. I know some guys over there.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Well, first I wanted to thank Congressman Connolly for his efforts on behalf of Prince William County. But $1,385,375,000 I'm going to come back to that number a little bit later, but I want you to all keep that number in your heads. The transportation bill portion of the $787 billion federal stimulus package, the transportation portion, this is the portion that has lasting effect, that builds infrastructure which will last a generation. That portion of the $787 billion federal stimulus package was $27.5 billion. That's it. That's less than what the federal government spends on highway construction in a normal year. It doesn't stimulate much. Now, first of all, Secretary Homer is here, and I want to thank him in particular. He understands Prince William County's predicament and our efforts on transportation. He's been very generous to this community and has been a true ally and a friend to Prince William County. He's got friends on both sides of the aisle, both Republicans and Democrats like him, so he's got to be a pretty good guy. I never had a chance to work with him when he was at the county. He was there before my time, but I hear nothing but glowing things, good things about Secretary Homer. The Prince William County government, since 1988, has spent over $500 million of its own, of your money, of county taxpayer funds, of building its own roads. And we've done that, frankly, because of the shortfalls in spending by the state in Northern Virginia. Through that expenditure, we've built over 182 miles of lane miles of road in the county. And in 2006, we passed over a $300 million road bond. The unfortunate thing is, because the situation in the county and the economic situation that we're in, one half of those projects, a little bit more than one half, approximately $160 million worth of those projects, are now suspended until we receive additional funds. Now, naturally, when we heard that the federal government was proposing a stimulus package of $787 billion or more at the time, we were excited that perhaps we'd be able to use a significant portion of our share of that to fund some of those suspended projects. And we're hoping, and with Secretary Homer's help, I believe that we're going to be able to fund some of those projects, including the Fuller Heights Road project, and it's some additional funds that will come through the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. But I want to come back to what is actually coming back to Prince William County in terms of the federal stimulus. We are going to receive approximately $34 million from the federal government for the schools, which is good money for us. But Congressman Connolly said that, and he was proud of the fact that Virginia was going to use its federal stimulus funding to balance its budget. Think about that for a moment. Using one-time revenues, maybe over a 2-year period, to balance ongoing expenses, to balance your budget. That is something we do not do on the local government side. It's irresponsible. This budget that has been proposed by President Obama will double the national debt, the outstanding debt, as Delegate Marshall pointed out. It will double it in 6 years. It will triple it in 10 years. We're all going to have to pay for that. And I want to come back to that number. $1,385,375,000. That is your share of what has to be paid back. That's over $10,000 per household for every household in the United States. And Prince William's portion is over $1.3 billion. And what are we getting for it? $34 million in school spending and a little bit of transportation revenue. If somebody robs you of $100 and gives you $5 back, do you thank them? If we don't pay for this, our children will pay for this. It would have been far better to have the county take out this debt and spend it on itself and try to stimulate its own economy rather than have the federal government take so much and give back so little. So, whereas I appreciate his efforts, the fact is that I cannot thank the result of this federal stimulus package. It's not going to stimulate our economy, and it's going to place our children and ourselves into debt. But given the time of the hour, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you very much. Yes, Susan.
Sorry. Got to do this right, don't we? Okay. The question, I was a little frustrated with Congressman Connolly because he never really answered Bob's question. And I'm hoping that it won't be a sign for the rest of the evening to answer the question of whether Prince William County is shovel ready,
Yeah.
which was the bill tonight. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on, are we ready? Are we going to grab this money and go, or what?
Okay, that's a very good question. I meant to get to it as part of my main speech. But there's a couple of things that I want to point out, and Secretary Homer knows these things as well. No other county in the Commonwealth has done as much as Prince William County to build its own roads. And some people would say we're probably in the worst situation to do it, but we've continued to do it. Nobody else in the Commonwealth has a road building project of nearly the same size, and we're continuing with about half of those projects from the 2006 road bond. I could go on and on about the road projects, the Prince William County Parkway, and I think Pierce was around at that time when that was approved, and we built that. But we we're continuing to build the Linton Hall Road project. Well, actually, that's been complete. We're continuing with Route 15, Mindyville Road, and there are others. Are we shovel ready? Yes. About $160 million worth of those projects from the 2006 road bond have already been approved by the voters. They're ready to go. And in fact, some of those we've already acquired some of the right-of-way. In the case of the North Route 1 project in Woodbridge, including the 123 interchange at Route 1, which I might add is a perfect project because it ties right into BRAC and the expansion of Fort Belvoir and Quantico Marine Corps Base. That's a $100 million project. Not only have we approved that project, but the project's been designed. It is shovel ready. If anything's shovel ready, that is shovel ready. It's ready to go. Now, what is shovel ready? That's a matter for, how quickly could we get the money on the ground and start to break ground is a question. But I would say that there's probably no other community in the Commonwealth of Virginia that is more shovel ready. The other thing I want to add, and before I got here, I asked some of our transportation guys, what else would you say? Pierce is going to be in the audience, and what plea would you make with him? And say, look, not only has Prince William County been spending its own money on these projects, but we've also have the experience of working with the feds, working with VDOT in these projects, and we have the experience of working within federal and state guidelines and within their constraints. So if there is a community that is ready, that is shovel ready and ready for that federal stimulus package funding, it's Prince William County. Ron?
Yes. One of the Ron Holman from Dumfries District. What do you do? What are the
Here, why don't you ask it here?
what are the effects in the out years if we take this money and spend it on something? Is the federal government going to mandate us to continue spending on that particular thing?
Well, that's a very good question. We won't know until we receive the funds. Now, I want to say a couple of things on that point. First of all, on the school side, I'm very concerned about the superintendent's budget. The $34 million has been used. Now, when they answer the question of how they're restoring the COLA for the teachers, the 2.9% cost of living adjustment for our teaching personnel. Now, first of all, I want to get it on record. I absolutely support more money for teachers. Everybody knows our teachers do a great job. I've got 2 children inside of our Prince William County school system, but I'm very concerned about how this money is being spent. Suddenly, after the $34 million was provided to our school system, the cost of living adjustment, which had been taken off the table this year in January, is now put back on. Now, the problem with this is that as federal funds come in this coming fiscal year, in fiscal year 2010 and 2011, their budget is balanced. But when those funds are gone and the COLA has been instituted, you can't take that money away from the teachers once you give it to them. So how do you fund it then? And they've got a massive budget deficit in fiscal years 2012, 2013, and 2014. Now, I told them the other night, I said, look, how you spend your money and how you divide that between staff salaries and COLAs and adding more teachers to reduce the student-teacher ratio and other expenses in the school system is your business. That's why the people of Prince William County elected you. But it is my responsibility to make sure to approve your budget. And the only requirement I have in that budget is that it be balanced. And it needs to be balanced over the 5-year term. Now, some of them have said, well, you've approved budgets that were not balanced in the 5-year plan in the past. And I said, but now is a different time. Our economy is in turmoil. Nobody in this room, not Congressman Connolly, nobody in the Congress, not President Obama, nobody knows when we're going to be out of this thing. So we have to play conservative, and I'm very concerned that in fiscal year 2012, when their budget is still out of balance, that they're going to be forced to make some catastrophic decisions to balance the budget, which could mean teacher layoffs, and that is the most heinous thing that can happen. And we have to do whatever we can. We have to look in the long term. We have to make the difficult decisions now. We can't just hope. Hope is a good thing. But hope is not a plan. We need to plan for the worst and hope for the best. On the county side, to the extent we do receive federal stimulus funds, the greatest thing about transportation projects, as Secretary Homer knows, is that, for the most part, with some maintenance required afterward, you build a highway and it's there. There's no ongoing construction cost for that highway. That's the great thing. That is why FDR spent so much money on the Work Progress Administration, WPA. You build a construction project, you put people to work immediately, and when they're done, you've left something. You spent money, but you've left something for succeeding generations, and there's not a whole lot of money that needs to be taken into account for the future for the maintenance of those projects. So transportation projects must take precedence. To the extent that we do receive other funds, we're going to do it responsibly. If we receive some money for the COPS grant, which is additional funds for our police, we already have built into our 5-year plan to hire an additional 25 officers, not this year, but starting next year and into the final 4 years of our plan. What we will do with that money, frankly, is to hire the officers now, this coming fiscal year. Just move it up so there's not a gap in our budget. We hire the officers now, but it's already built into our plan for the succeeding years to continue funding of those additional officers. So I think that's the way it needs to be done. We have to be very careful to make sure that we're not buying something now or paying for something now that when the money dries up, when the federal stimulus package's money is gone, that we're left holding the bag with no additional revenues to fix it.
I wonder if we could stop and let Pierce come say his comments.
Absolutely.
And then we may have some more interchange. Would that be all right?
That'd be perfect. Good. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Secretary Homer, I've known Pierce for a long time. I got to know him when I was at the Board of Trade, and we used to advocate transportation projects. And in those days, we were looking at Prince William County projects, and now Pierce is helping us with the whole state of Virginia. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good evening. It's great to be home and to see so many wonderful faces. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your kind remarks. And I'd like to just make a couple of points before we dive into the main question, which is Prince William shovel ready? And the answer is yes. Okay, we've answered that question. Okay. You know, there's always back and forth about pieces of legislation or major policy issues, but I think one of the things that this community should be proud of, and that I see every day, or at least every week in Richmond, is the numbers of letters that are signed by Chairman Stewart and his colleagues in the region is extremely important to Northern Virginia, which is working together as a region. The same holds true for Congressman Connolly. Virtually every letter I get from him regarding transportation is signed by Frank Wolf and/or Jim Moran. And so there is a very strong bipartisan consensus about trying to solve the very, very difficult. This is our biggest problem in Northern Virginia. Look, we got great schools, we got great parks, there's economic opportunity, there's a wonderful healthcare system, but our weakness in Northern Virginia is transportation. It's being able to get to school, get to work, have some measure of control over our lives. And so I think we all realize how important that is. Before I come back, though, and talk about transportation, since there's been so much discussion about the stimulus generally, I just, again, reflecting on my history, I worked here for 15 years as a county staffer. I had the opportunity to work with Chuck Colgan and Harry Parrish and Jack Rollison, Bob Marshall, a wonderful legislative delegation, their successors equally well. There have been very, very profound investment decisions in this community. Sometimes they fall in the category of shovel ready, but sometimes they fall in the category of imagination. And driving up here from Richmond up I-95 right there at 619 and seeing that incredible museum for the United States Marine Corps, that was a dream. And that is an investment that brings huge returns to this community, not just tourism, but the pride that we feel. If you come up Route 234 and you cross over Route 28 onto the Route 234 bypass and you look to your right, you see George Mason University. When I came to work for Prince William County in 1987, my first assignment from then County Executive Bob Noe was to, you know, we're thinking about a need for higher education in this county. Could you do a demographic study to see what we could do? We're thinking about maybe getting some weekend MBA programs and some teacher certification programs underway here. That was the thinking in 1987. Today, you have 400,000 square feet of classroom and high-tech research space under roof. You have some of the most important biotechnology research anywhere in the world. You have engineering. You have graduate students. It has brought things like a chip plant to this community, like the biotechnology firm. What's the one where they put on the great demonstration where they freeze things? Maybe if I turn this way. That was a dream. It was imagination that started out. Think about that. It was less than 20 years ago, somebody said, well, maybe we can get weekend MBA classes and teacher certifications. And look what it's grown into. If you look around George Mason University, and Mr. Wilborn, when you were on the board, we dealt with this issue. And it was the very same issue that's being addressed here today, which is, boy, I don't know, because what was the proposal on the table? We had a bunch of bankrupt landowners around George Mason University, and we saw an opportunity to acquire the ground, today the Innovation Office Park. And there were very, very hard questions that were raised. Boy, is that an appropriate role for the public sector? Very fair question. Are we compensating the landowners appropriately? Are we paying too much or too little? Is this a good thing for the county? And here we are less than 15 years later, 12 years later, really. I think it's a resounding yes. Look at the businesses that are in that park and the families that are being supported. And I bring that up as we think about stimulus, and it is important because I deal in a world of shovel-ready all day. But we can't forget the world of imagination, and that investment takes many, many forms, and we have some incredibly important and powerful examples right here in Prince William County. Now, let me come back to the question at hand. Is Prince William shovel-ready? The answer is yes. Does Prince William County have transportation needs? Absolutely. Is Prince William County the poster child, really, for self-help? Absolutely. And Mr. Chairman, you've carried on a tradition now with your predecessor and his predecessor. Prince William County has put more into its local transportation, both transit and highways, than any other county in the state. And I think it shows. I had a great ride up here, by the way, Mr. Chairman. Of course, I was going against traffic.
Take 234
right, I took 234, the 234 bypass. And you know, it's important to ask how some of those things got done. Yeah, there's the bond program, but you know, the Route 234 bypass, how'd that get done? That was a couple chairmen and chairwomen from Northern Virginia working together around 3 or 4 regional priorities, taking a funding package to the General Assembly. It was an act of imagination. Everybody said never pass. It was $500 million for projects in Fairfax and Prince William and Loudoun County. It was a great, great, great thing. And so that's how those things happened. It started. We need to. Where is the imagination and where is the value for that? And the stuff, I don't get to deal with the imagination stuff is really fun. I don't get to deal with that side of it, but I think some of the things in energy research and rail transportation are enormous opportunities for this community. And we would be remiss as a region and a county if we didn't look at those as incredible economic long-term opportunities of imagination. On the side that I deal with, which is the less glamorous side, are we shovel-ready? What are some of the things that we're looking at? And let me try and put this stimulus package in perspective. I think, and I agree with the chairman and Congressman Connolly, I wish the transportation package was substantially larger. For Virginia as a Commonwealth, there's about $700 million of highway funding. There's about $120 million of transit funding statewide. It's one-time money. So you want to put it into capital projects where you can make an investment and make a difference. What is $700 or $820 million of transportation funding? To put that in perspective, since June of this year, I'm the chair of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. We make funding decisions for the state. We have cut $3 billion in transportation projects. So put 820 versus $3 billion. What are some of the things in addition that has been happening to transportation generally in the state? Well, in addition to cutting $3 billion worth of projects, we're in the process of laying off 1,000 full-time and 450 part-time employees. We are also looking at reducing significantly services. Rest areas have gotten quite a bit of attention. We are combining and consolidating facilities and staff all over the state. Ferry service is not important here in Northern Virginia, but if you live in Hampton Roads or Northern Neck and you've got to get to work in Williamsburg or to the nuclear plant in Surrey County, those services are being substantially cut back. We have a very, very serious long-term funding situation with respect to transportation. And it is not getting any better. And the stimulus, in my judgment, does 2 things. And again, we're on the shovel-ready side of the house. The first is it does offer an opportunity to put some projects back on the table. I will tell you, just again to put it in perspective, $700 million, the governor had a website, solicited comments for projects of education and healthcare and transportation. We had requests for $192 billion, with a B, in project requests. And so that came in. The governor sent a little note, said, here's all the requests, you know, go work with it, Pierce. So we have an interesting task over the next couple of weeks to try and squeeze that amount through that tiny little funnel of funding. But there are some important projects that we can undertake to relieve congestion in the region. They are going to be predominantly on major interstate and primary highways. They will do things to help the reliability of VRE, so additional locomotives and track work, the upkeep of Metro Rail. These will not be glamorous things. They are shovel-ready things that do not require environmental permits, do not require controversial public hearings, can be put out to bid within 120 days, and to meet every regulation known to man. Those are the things that we will do with that money. But there's another side to the transportation stimulus funds that I think are terribly important for us to think about. And we go back to the very basis for this legislation is about jobs. And a highway project, you know, it's the guys at the quarry who are busting rocks. It's the woman designing at a computer-aided design station in an engineering office. It's a laborer raking asphalt. It's a skilled laborer welding a piece of metal at the top of a bridge. Highway projects and transit, and particularly transit reconstruction projects, employ a wide range of people from highly skilled to unskilled labor. And one of the things that, you know, everybody thinks VDOT builds roads. VDOT does not build roads. VDOT hires private contractors to build roads. And most contractors are people like us. They are small and mid-sized, largely family-owned businesses that are going out of business and bankrupt at an alarming rate. When we cut $3 billion out of our transportation construction budget, we take jobs out of the economy, and we, unfortunately, take businesses out of the mainstream of economic life. Now, why is this important to Northern Virginia? Well, and I know there's a lot of people here in the building trades, or maybe somebody in your family is. There are skills that are being lost forever. If you're trying to rebuild a bridge that was built during the Works Progress administration, I guarantee you a recent engineering graduate student is not going to know how to take that bridge apart and replace it. It's the same thing, the difference between building a new house and renovating a 300-year-old townhouse in Alexandria. Very different skill set. Well, what happens when that guy who understands a certain type of metal and a certain kind of attachment, you know, that made those old-fashioned bridges work is gone, and we don't have anybody that can tell us how to fix it? And that business is gone, that knowledge, that expertise, that family commitment is gone. So my last point, and I'll be happy to entertain questions about projects because I know that's what everybody is interested in, but to me, a couple of things to think about. Investment can be shovel-ready or it can be imagination. Out of $3 billion worth of cuts, maybe we can make up about $700 million of those. That's not anything to laugh at. That is substantial. But also, it is so important that we maintain the workforce and the small businesses that build, maintain, and operate our transportation facilities. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions along with Chairman Stewart. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Pierce. Thank you very much. Why don't you sit there and I'll, yes, sir. Yeah, Pierce. Yeah.
We'll share. We can share.
This is directed at Pierce. In the one question that Congressman Connolly answered, he did talk about an effort that he worked to soften the effect of money, I guess maintenance or construction money, being spent in areas of high unemployment rather than high need. Could you explain to the audience here what conditions the federal government has put on the road money and what conditions the federal government has put on the transit money?
Okay. Thank you and I meant to present that, Bob. The conditions on the transit money are essentially that it goes directly to the transit property, so to VRE, to PRTC, to Metro, and they can only spend it on capital purposes. and there are a host of regulations that flow from that, but I think for purposes of this discussion, that's adequate. There's not a lot of restrictions on the transit money. With respect to the highway money, there's a couple of things that I'll call urban myths. And one of those myths is that we can only spend highway stimulus money in economically disadvantaged areas of the state with very high unemployment and very low wages. That's not true. In fact, the stimulus bill, like Bob, as you well know, a lot of pieces of legislation have a lot of conflicting trends in them. So part of the money is distributed on a population basis that would reward the urban areas, but yet there's another provision in the bill that says give priority to projects in economically disadvantaged areas. So what that means is we do have to look at places like Martinsville and Portsmouth and see if there are projects that are in there, but it by no means means that all of that money or even a majority of that money needs to go to those economically disadvantaged areas. Delegate Marshall asked the question, who do I have to justify this to? Let me start with the list of justifications. First, on the unelected side, it is the Commonwealth Transportation Board, the Federal Highway Administration, the United States Department of Transportation Inspector General. On the elected side, I've got to get something that works with local elected officials, with the Metropolitan Planning Organization, actually has veto authority over project selection. The congressional delegation, while they don't have formal approval, I can guarantee you they're every bit as interested as the General Assembly. The General Assembly, again, while they don't have formal approval, is very involved, and in fact, this coming Thursday, Delegate May and Senator Yvonne Miller have asked me to come to the Transportation Accountability Commission and report on the status of the program. We'll be talking about pavement, bridges, BRAC, and some of the other project designations. I have to basically have, I won't say formal concurrence, but at least non-anger from about 12 layers of government, and the one phrase that is recurrent, because as Congressman Connolly talked about, the strict oversight, the word and the phrase that is very current in Washington right now is by the book. And I can tell you they are scrutinizing each and every project, each and every decision in a way that I've not seen in my 20-some years of working in transportation.
Other questions?
Thank you. I'd like to make just a brief observation that although the scale of the numbers is considerably smaller than in the county, the city of Manassas is as shovel-ready as any place in the nation. We have a public works department that's absolutely drooling with anticipation. These boys are born to dig, and they want to get on with it. We have a couple of major transportation projects, major for us, Wellington Overpass, we're over the railroad to try and improve traffic flow. Secretary Homer came in on 234 bypass, where we're trying to work on a 234 business, which has been a bottleneck for God knows how many years. We have other help with the dam at the Lake Manassas Reservoir. Also, in Northern Virginia, we mentioned, we're talking mostly about roads, but the transit system, both the PRTC and the VRE are getting something around $9 million each, a little bit more. The PRTC is going to use most of it for capitalized lease expenditures, and the VRE is going to build most of it, not all of it, on additional locomotives, large new locomotives that will haul 8 cars instead of 6. And so that's really cheap incremental capacity from transportation, because you don't need any more trains. So we're working hard too. Thank you.
Good. That's very good. There was a question over here, I think.
I just wanted to know if, in fact, the rest stops are closed, if they will put the property up for private enterprise to run a business there.
Yeah, great question. And let me go back to explain, how serious the financial situation is with respect to transportation. The transportation in Virginia is largely funded through the gas tax, which has declined very, very substantially in the last year as the largest source. The second largest source is the sales tax on motor vehicle sales, which has declined about 30% just in the last 9-12 months. And so we have a very, very sharp contraction. That's why we've cut $3 billion worth of projects. That's why we're laying off. These are not position vacancies. We're laying off 1,000 full-time and 450 part-time employees. And then on the services front, mowing, ferry services, consolidating, combining headquarters. The rest areas, it's amazing to me that this issue, bathrooms, have attracted more attention than the kind of congestion projects that have been canceled when we have close to 2,000 structurally deficient bridges in this state. And quite honestly, on most interstate highways, it's kind of hard to find an interchange that doesn't have a McDonald's or a Burger King with some kind of rest facilities. Absolutely. In fact, many of those fast food places welcome and encourage RVs. But let me answer your question specifically. You've said, can they be sold or commercialized? We would not be proposing this. I have twice tried through 2 reauthorization to get federal authority to privatize or to allow commercial enterprises inside our rest areas. It is against the law. Can you imagine that? And there's a very simple reason. There is a very powerful lobby every 5 years comes together. It's the truck stop owners. They have blocked that legislation, and I've tried twice. When we had in the early 2002, when the reauthorization was underway, Senator John Warner was actually chair of the subcommittee. Very, very powerful position writing that bill. He couldn't get it done. So it's a very, very entrenched interest. And, it's the wrong thing at the wrong time. And it's putting all of us, Virginia tourism is our second largest industry in the Commonwealth. This is not something we willingly do. But here's the choice that we face. We spend $21 million a year on bathrooms on our interstate highways. That is a lot of money. And so legitimately, we have to look at ways to save money. If we had the option of putting those out to bid and say you can have a concession to sell donuts or hot dogs, whatever, in exchange for running a clean facility, we would do that in a heartbeat. We have actually sought that legislative break from Congress now twice, but both times unsuccessfully.
Is that federal law?
Yes, that's federal law.
Call Congress.
We're going to be knocking on his door. There was a question, what about New Jersey or Maryland? Those facilities were built originally as toll roads, and then they were grandfathered into the interstate highway system.
Right, yeah, right. Yes, back here. Right. Yep.
Hi, I'm Pat Lightfoot. But had you thought about what's going to happen with them if you close them? Will they stay there?
The question is, what will happen to the rest areas if they're closed? Well, we've had that experience with closing. They are a hazard if they are not properly closed, and so we would find a way to secure the facilities and bar them. We would not allow overnight parking there because of public safety issues.
Put some kind of blockade so you can't pull in there.
Yes, sir.
Right.
But what about in the future when we're planning to have battery-powered and electric autos? What's the possibility of using them to service the electric automobiles?
Well, again, as part of the Climate Change Commission, we had looked at making rest areas available because charging stations are going to, with a plug-in hybrid, will be valuable and a commodity. If we could privatize and commercialize, we would not have that problem. But you can't have a vacant rest area on an interstate highway. It's just an invitation for mischief.
I think there was a question back there. Yes.
I was just curious what has happened to 528, the Route 29. I knew at one time it was taken off the board. I just was curious, is it going to be affected by the stimulus?
Why don't you repeat that question? Just
The question was, what's happened to the widening of Route 28? And Chairman Stewart, I'm sure, will want to add in. We came close to getting it funded about 3 years ago, and the funding has been on a slow decline. We have gradually eliminated, I think, virtually all funding for that project.
That's right. The county had a portion of that. I think it was from Vint Hill to Fitzwater, and that's one of the casualties of the 2006 road bond that was supposed to be funded but has now been suspended.
Any other questions of either in the back? We need the mic for the video.
I'll give Mr. Homer a break for a second. I've got a twofer for the chairman if he's willing to take a twofer. My personal concerns, your personal concerns aside regarding the stimulus package on a whole, I've got two issues with it as regards the county, and that's administration and allocation. I'm curious what the board and what you plan to do to ensure the administration and the oversight of those funds in an effective and efficient manner. You mentioned the COP grants a little while ago as an example, and I can think back to the DOJ 9/11 block grants a couple of years ago. We're still buying radios that were supposed to have been bought with that money, and we used a portion of that money to buy a boat. What are you going to do to ensure that the funds from the stimulus package are used for what they're intended to be used for? And the second is equitable allocation of the stimulus funds across the county. You mentioned how little the county is getting as a whole. I looked at the projects that were submitted by Mr. Fenton, and it seems like they're overwhelmingly on the eastern part of the county, and there's very little on the western part, particularly the Gainesville district.
Well, thank you, Councilman. In terms of the equitability issue, you have to remember that on the transportation side, we're in competition with the rest of the state, with the rest of the Commonwealth to receive those funds. So what we have to do is not look at what's fair with inside the county, but which projects are going to be most competitive in attracting those funds. Because if you look at the $300 million road package that we passed in 2006, it was $325 million or so. The bulk of those projects, frankly, were out in the western end of the county. So I think it'd be hard to argue that the western end has been shifted, has been short shrifted. Sorry, I'm mixing up my whatever the word is. You know, I think it's gotten its fair share of road bond projects. But when we submit our list to Secretary Homer and to VDOT to try to compete with those funds, we want to submit the projects which we think have the best chance of receiving the federal stimulus funds, because it's not other than the $8 million that's going to come from NVTA, which is a fairly small amount of money. The rest of it, if we get it, we may or may not get money. It all depends upon whether or not a project in the county receives it. And I'm sorry, Bob, what was your first question? Well, the administration of funds, the funds are clearly going to be, they're other than the $8 million from NVTA, all of the funds, for example, Fuller Heights Road and all the rest will be specifically earmarked by Secretary Homer, by VDOT, for particular projects. So there's not going to be the same situation which there may have been several years before my time. I'm not familiar with the boat issue, but. Yeah. Yeah. The question from Bob Weir is what are we going to do to make sure that the funds that are given, the federal funds that are given to the county, other than the transportation funds, are used efficiently? Is that fair, Bob? And I think again, we don't know how much we're going to get yet. We just simply don't know. But I'm committed, and the board is committed, I think, at this point, that if we do receive a COP grant funding, that must be used, by the way, for hiring new officers. It must be used. The funding is there for, I think, 2, maybe 3 years, and then it goes away. At that point, we're going to work it into our budget. We've got a few things to work on, but that money must be used for the hiring of new police officers. There is additional money that we might be able to receive. There's been some for the health clinic and so forth, but there will be no other major sources of funding that will be given to the county as a result of federal stimulus.
Any other questions? Right here.
Hi, I'm Catherine Godhart from Brinsfield. Can you just clarify that? Because I thought that you had said that there was a certain amount of money that was allocated to the schools and a certain amount of money that was allocated to transportation, and now I'm hearing something else. Thanks.
You're right. The schools, again, it's $34 million. That consists of roughly $24 million, which is, I think the school system has more flexibility. Mr. Trenum is here. He'd be better positioned to answer that question. But some of that funding for the schools, roughly I think $10 million of it is for specific programs inside the school system. There we go.
Is that it? Michelle, shall I turn it back to you? Do you have anything else to say? We thank you for coming. Let me thank my panelists. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you very much.